Hello and welcome. This is a different type of panel that we'll be doing today. I hope you guys enjoy it. And today I'm here with a bunch of lovely ladies, and I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves, and then we're gonna dive into sadness and grief. But it won't be all bad, I hope. I think we'll learn quite a lot. So, any volunteers to take one for the team and introduce themselves first? Not all at once.
All right.
We're all so polite. I'll go.
Everyone's like,
I'll go first. My name is Brittani Oliver C.S. Navarro. I am a MFT out in San Diego, and I work with transitional age youth, so I mean 16 to 25. I have been a grief and loss specialist for the last 15 years. I've been able to present around the country and around the world on this topic, and specifically trained in grief and bereavement. So thank you for having me.
I totally planned that, you guys. I didn't just learn this right now. This is specifically why I wanted Brittani to come to the panel. It was all part of my plan.
Who's
Ruby,
next?
do you want to go next since you're like just next to Brittani?
Hi, Rubi Mc Coy. I am currently a doctoral candidate at Palo Alto University. I'm currently working at the San Francisco VA at the Trans Clinic. I have a master's in industrial and organizational psychology with a focus on creating bereavement programs, and a master's in thanatology with a focus on suicide and traumatic grief. And yeah, I think right now still in training, so I don't have too much extra fun stuff to plug, but glad to be here.
Again, once again, I totally planned this. I totally knew that her master's was in that. Okay, fantastic. I'm killing it, you guys. I'm great at this. All right.
I can go next. I'm Dr. Kaela Joseph. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and I am not a grief specialist. However, I do work with folks around grief as it relates to sexuality and gender identity. I mostly work in LGBTQ plus psychology in several different places within the Bay Area.
Hi, and my name is Lorran Garrison. I'm a school psychologist here in Northern California. I work mostly with school-age children. Excuse my voice, I'm getting over COVID a little bit. So I am the co-founder of Little Brainstorm. We write social emotional picture books, and we're working on a novel right now to support, kids who are multicultural and a little, different, who think a little bit different. I mostly talk on the intersectionality of being I bring folks to the table who are Black, Indigenous, or person of color, who are queer, or who are neurodivergent. I've spoken at the National Association of School Psychologists, the California Association of School Psychologists, San Diego Comic-Con, WonderCon, the Gender Spectrum Symposium, TAGS, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very passionate about supporting trans youth. And so that's another subject I am talking about. And so we talk about a lot of grief in that, especially when I'm counseling kids.
Awesome. So like I mentioned briefly, we were going to talk about grief because I don't know if anybody else has ever experienced this, but I said recently, and it was like 2 or 3 years ago. So Loki is my favorite character. He's not up here. He has his own like shrine over there. You can see, but he's my favorite character. And like all of my friends know about it, and that's probably like the first thing I say, like when I introduce myself, and I learn that the other person is like super geeky and into the same things I am. But I don't think it's a spoiler anymore. It's been years, and if you haven't seen the movies, then sorry, my guy. It's been years now. But he died, right? And in a horrible way. And I think it's just like Tom Hiddleston is such a good actor that when he was like, I was so excited for this. I was still in grad school, and all my friends, we had this thing. We're all busy, and the only way we could meet was, I think it was like on a Thursday, and we had like every week we will meet and we will watch one more Marvel movie until we watch them all, so we can see like the final like two of like, the Avengers sort of series. And when he died, I was just like, hey, he can't die. It's a joke, right? And because he's died like a bunch of times, but this time I was like, he's coming back, right? Like, I'm sure. And there was like, I think there was a lot of fans out there that were just like me, that were like, no, yeah, he's coming back. Like, he didn't turn blue, back to his original form or whatever. And we were like all in denial. And I think sometimes when we are very attached to a character, or we love a character so much because we identify with the character, or we see, or we want to be like the character, or whatever it might be, or they're like a safe character for us. When we experience grief because either the show got canceled, it ended, the character died, the creator of the show now has legal allegations or hopeful things that uh, they have done, like that grief that comes sometimes, other people in our life that might not understand and just sort of wave it off as like, well, it's fictional. Why are you so sad? Like, why are you grieving over this like fictional world when there's like real life problems? So I wanted to create to do this panel just to talk about like the different kinds of grief we can experience when we are part of like just any fandom, really. So I talked a little bit about my grief when Loki died, and now I'm kind of like, I think I was lucky enough that the character got a really nice sort of like ending to their character, and I think we saw it as well with like Wolverine. That was kind of sad. Well, he's coming back, so I'm not sure if we got an ending or not. But when we see a really nice sort of like arc, it feels a little bit better because at least we saw them for like so many movies, and we got a closing thing for the arc, and we knew it was coming. So do you guys have any of your favorite characters or things like this happen in the fandoms that you're in? Anyone can go.
I'm gonna start. So I am a huge fan of The Last of Us. That's actually my background today. And when I first played that character of Joel Miller, um, it was such an amazing experience for me as a woman, as a gamer, as a woman gamer, which is what they really like to call us, even though we should just be gamers. Um, there was for once a very paternal character who was paternal without being paternalistic. And he has this younger girl with him. She is not sexualized. She's very fierce. She's very strong. You get to play as her. She challenges him in a way that isn't just, she's so sassy. Like, she is tough, and she has been through her own grief. And watching them grow together and build this just amazing journey. I really classify The Last of Us as the great modern Western of these characters who are going west, and the landscape in and of itself is the hostile, is the great enemy. And to see them go through all of that and to finally get to safety and to finally get to be together. And I waited years for that second game to come out, and spoiler alert, sadly, in the second game, Joel Miller is killed very early on in the game. And the entire second game is about Ellie trying to find ways to navigate her rage and fury because she has such bad, complicated grief and such bad post-traumatic stress disorder. She's devastated and furious, and we are forced to change roles partway through the game to play as Joel's killer. And it was one of those moments where I was just like, you can't do this to me. I can't play this person who took somebody I love away from me. And getting to learn more about her story and recognize that really history is written by the victors. that she was in a lot of ways very justified. And I wanted to connect with the community about this dialogue because this game is incredible. And the amount of transphobia and misogyny that came from the community, because the character Abby is a very big, strong, muscular woman, and the amount of people who were just so hateful and hostile. They weren't discussing grief. They were talking about how a female character didn't fit beauty standards. And it just it made it difficult to connect on something that was so personal and so meaningful. And I just wanted to talk about it without having to hear anti-trans and anti-female and anti-Semitic and all kinds of commentary, because the creator of this is Israeli Jewish. So it kind of made not only the situation really difficult to process, but then finding ways to connect with the community. It felt like I was denied kind of that collective grief experience, especially because it was during COVID. I could talk about that for like 2 weeks, but I'm going to stop myself here.
Wow, I have no words. So I've heard of the game and the show and everything, but I didn't know the story because I'm not really a gamer. I just started learning video games, so I'm still like a newbie about everything. But I think sometimes people outside of our fandoms or outside of what we typically consider geek culture don't really understand how sometimes it's not just a video game or like even just not even a video game can have such an impactful story that we can relate to, right? Because I remember my parents, I think I was going to watch Captain America Civil War with my siblings, and then I was like, oh, it's a really good story, right? And I was like ranting to my parents about it, and then they're like, yeah, but they're just superheroes. And I was like, it's more than that. It's about more than, like, yes, they're wearing weird outfits and all that, but like you have to pay attention to the story, right? So there is a lot more to the story sometimes. And just because it's a fictional world or whatever, a lot of it comes from some like a very real place for the creators. Do anyone else want to talk about one of their fandoms and the moment they experienced that grief?
I can jump in and, speaking of like dominant culture and dominant theories and things like that, I'm up here in Northern California, so I wanted to give a moment and to thank the landholders of where we are right now. So for me, it's the Aholani tribe. So they're stewards of our land. And so I wanted to acknowledge that because I usually do that in everything that I do and speak. So the one death that really got to me in my memory is I learned how to read through comic books. And I remember the first comic book I read, it was Batman and Super Freeze. There's a cover of it in the 80s somewhere, because I grew up on the island of Guam. And to think someplace that was so cold that it could like freeze bodies was just kind of like, mind blowing for me, because, growing up on a Guam is a tropical island. It never gets that cold. So that was one of my favorite series. And so I read a lot of comic books, not only to learn how to read, but also, escapism from the island life or anything like that. And this is dating me, but, here we are. The death of Batman in The Killing Joke. Any fans? Okay, Kaela's nodding her head. So, I mean, it was like unheard of. You don't kill off a main character. Why would you do that? And fans were upset about that because, why would you kill off a main character? It's just money grabbing, this and this and that. So that kind of like stopped my joy for a moment of reading comic books for that moment, because like, why would you do that? What does grief mean? And all of these fans were angry. And, how do you support a franchise? What did Joker mean, when he did those things? It's been a while since I read it. And, Batman has been revived since then, like, 20, 30 plus years now. So, and then, then they killed off Superman because that was such a great, Brittany's clapping. And
no, that was my next point.
And Brittany celebrated.
I mean, I can kind of see why it can be celebrated though. Which is a good segue into the boys, but I digress. So that was my experience as, as a fangirl of comics. And, at the time, fangirls of comics, that wasn't considered feminine. It wasn't considered, I don't know, it was considered very non-traditional to like comic books. So it was kind of like, I was kind of like a, what's the word? Like a closeted comic fan person.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that was my first experience. And then like thinking about it throughout the years, whether it's characters or like my next experience was like Woody Allen. Do you remember Woody Allen? And do you remember like him marrying his daughter? And I still don't know how I feel about that, but that's my experience in a nutshell.
And then I'll piggyback off of that because I was like, funeral for a friend, like going through my head because I've been on this series now. I'm on a different podcast for Superman specifically and thinking about how this collective grief was a new transition for a lot of people. And I didn't know, like, I've been very novice in some ways and like learning about fandom and of those things and being accepted into this like culture and learning so many new things and like watch or reading like funeral for a friend and trying to figure out like what is the purpose of marketing, how do we grieve, like how do they decide what is what is shown, because like even in the marketing for the comics it's Superman is dead and specifically using the word dead like that. Like when we do any kind of like lifespan development, child development and grief and loss, it's trying to make sure that they understand that there's some permanence around it. And so you can't say your doggy went to heaven or grandpa is in a different place because children won't understand that there's some permanence around it. And so it's really interesting when we think about like funeral for a friend because like everything was so explicit and really wanting to really explicitly figure out like how we can pull and tug at heartstrings of grief and loss for people, because it's like how do we mourn this enormous figure in our lives. And then when I think about grief too, I also want to just like remind everybody that like grief doesn't have to necessarily deal with like somebody who died. It can be loss of a lot of different things. It can be loss of a job, loss of a relationship, it can be loss of a litany of things. But something that personally touches me as somebody who was a young adult orphan, I think about how so many of these supers lose somebody and lose a key figure in their life, regardless if they're parents or a sibling or something else. And as somebody who's lost both their parents and two siblings, like I see so much of myself in these stories. And it's not necessarily about the loss of the person, like, or my hero, because I see so much of myself in Wanda. I understand Batman, like I get it. But you see these like side characters, the people who die. Like we forget that sometimes the stories are so big that it's not just about the one person. It's about the things that happen to that one person. And a lot of the heroes' arcs are because of loss and because of grief. And if it's T'Challa or Spider-Man or Batman or whoever, like they're making, I don't know, like identities around the experience that they have. And this is that like big T trauma, little T trauma. Big T is like universal, like little T is for you. And so if I'm experiencing something that's like difficult for me or that makes me struggle, doesn't mean you will. However, we have all these heroes who immerse out of the little T and big T traumas. And so I really like the conversation that we're having when we think about grief and loss and we think about character development, because I you guys can please correct me, and like I'm sure comments will too. I don't know many characters who haven't experienced the death of someone outside of Doctor Strange. Like he lost something. He lost like his like God-given talents in some ways, but almost everyone is connected by something, like losing something. And so I think that's what ties us into these characters and ties us into these stories, because my God, who hasn't lost something? And that's why it's so precious and so important to talk about grief and loss and talk about bereavement, because this is an excellent showcase of what do we do now? And kind of going like bouncing off of you again, for death, like, you know, funeral for a friend, for Superman, what do we do now? That's the biggest question that was really posed of, we're in this experience, we've lost this magnificent figure, and then the world goes on, just like everybody does day to day in life. When you lose a brother or a sister or a mother or an aunt or an uncle, life goes on. And so I really do appreciate like all these comics and these movies and everything else, because there are more stories to tell, and it invites more stories to tell for all of us. Sorry, that was a long-winded.
No, and that's fantastic.
I love it. Yeah.
Well, like one of the things I wanted to mention too is that sometimes, yes, life, you know, does go on. No, I think okay, I unfroze. Okay, that's good. So life does go on, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the grief is going to completely disappear, right? It might change, it might morph, it might look a little bit different, but sometimes it's still there. Maybe not so much with like our favorite like fandoms or whatever, but in our own like real life experiences, that's what we might experience, right? When we talk about sort of like the loss of a character or of a fandom, because nowadays, I don't know if it's just me, but I've been hearing a lot like online about how toxic this fandom is and how toxic that fandom is, right? And sometimes that's like grieving the loss of like my safe space, because now everybody's like just judging everyone else for what they like and what they don't like and all of the things. So it can be really difficult. So even if it happened like, you know, 10, 20 years ago, I can still feel the sadness every now and then, you know, and that does happen in our life where we still feel sad and we still remember the person and we're still grieving that they're no longer here, or that that job opportunity passed us by, or that I got fired without any reason, or that I've been discriminated against once again. You know, it's a and I think sometimes too it kind of piles on when it's like one after the other. Because I was just thinking to the quite recently, well, not so recently, after COVID, like the years just all sort of like blend together and make no sense anymore. But you know, after I think after Infinity War, and I feel like there was a lot of Marvel projects that came out, and a lot of people that decided to step away or stopped being part of the fandom. And a lot of people started using the term Marvel exhaustion, because there were just so many projects happening and it was hard to keep up with everything. It is very amazing that all the worlds and all the things are like all like sort of like together, but it can be very difficult to keep track of everything. And that kind of, I was like, yeah, you know, exhaustion of like having so many things happen. And some people criticize like some of my favorite projects, or downplay, or they didn't do so well, or they're like the characters are no longer coming back to, you know, to my favorite thing. And I completely lost my train of thought. Okay, hold on, give me a second.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I was just going to jump on what Brittani was saying. Like, so each character has their own grief of something, whether they lost someone that was close to them, or whether they lost something that was important, like Doctor Strange and his talent on surgery, for example, right? His hands, that was his main thing that made him who he was. And when I often counsel kids, especially after COVID, this is what I talk about. I talk about, tell me your favorite character, tell me your favorite whatever, because everyone has had some sort of grief. I mean, like even Steve in Minecraft, he loses all the time and he grieves for his pickaxe. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But it's what you do after the grief and afterwards, that resiliency that I'm trying to help the kids understand, especially after COVID, like these characters, nobody ever gave up. And that's, I think, what a lot of kids are having difficulty understanding, is that, you know, there is grief. There is that moment of remembrance and silence and, you know, thinking of the joy that once was. But then how do you pick that up and you know, essentially live? And, you know, we're here. How do you do that? What's the best way to fit in your lifestyle? We don't have to do it all today. And we're not asking you to not remember your mother who passed away, or that your mother might have cancer, or, you know, your dad that, or uncle that might, you know, died by suicide or anything like that. It's about, you know, how do you honor them and yet honor them by living? That is my, you know, perpetual question. And, you know, I'd love to hear what you guys do, you know, to help your clients.
Okay, so before we move on to that, like I remember now what I was talking about, because part of why I have why I was talking about Marvel exhaustion is because in these movies or superheroes, or like the people that yeah, mainly superheroes, there's so many tragedies. I mean, they can't catch a break. Like it's just this and this alien and this other thing. Like the world is constantly in danger. And how did you like keep up with that? Like it's just constantly like over and over again. Like yeah, like Lorran said, like we do have that the growth that comes, right? Like the like a very difficult challenge, but being constantly challenged can be very, very exhausting, right? And I remember talking to my brother one day, and he was talking about Spider-Man in the comics. I only read the Loki comics. uh, but so I don't have much knowledge of anything else. And he was like telling me, because that's his favorite character, and he said like, yeah, so in every single like storyline for Spider-Man, and please correct me if this is wrong, um he just like he ends up with nobody and nothing. Like he's just like not. And then like even in the Marvel movies, we saw that like everybody forgot who he was, and he ended up with nothing. And I'm like, that's so sad. He's so young, and I just like really fear for him. And I'm like, I just want, like, for a while there was this post that was going around. I think it was like Tumblr or like Pinterest or whatever, and a lot of people were like, can we just have like Avengers sitcom where they're just like doing everyday life like things, so we can like feel slightly better about like the end of the world? Because like every single movie was like this major life-threatening event for like not only the heroes but everyone else. So I was like, can we just have like a time where we're not like constantly grieving something or like losing somebody? Like, just, you know, I just want to watch them make breakfast and, you know,
Well,
bicker with each other.
I have to say though, didn't we get the Marvel sitcom, and wasn't that also all about grief? We got one of it. Hmm. Yeah.
Well, and
No, I
and
was
to that,
as you were saying that, I was just thinking like I immediately thought to Stranger Things. Where this bad, pardon my language, bad shit just happens all the time. It's just this constant situation, or even Grey's Anatomy. Like, just bad things just happen constantly. And so, like, you have these characters who have to deal with it. And then for people who are watching or witnessing it, they have to also just deal with it. So you have to go through an episode or a story or something else and just be unsatisfied because another bad thing happens. I remember like the last Grey's Anatomy season that I watched was like after the plane crash. I was like, there's too many bad things that happen to this one set of people. I just can't do it anymore. And it's just I wrote for Ambiguous Loss for Stranger Things, and it's just well, what does happen when you have this monumental experience where some kid gets captured by the Upside Down? Like, what do characters actually really do when bad things happen? And multiple bad things happen to the same family in all of these stories. And so it's bizarre to think that we don't talk more about like grief and loss, that we don't address it, because not only is it happening to these characters, it's happening to us as we experience it, because it's like, oh God, are they going to be around next week? Especially for the platforms that are week to week, and you get to see what do we do with this person, with this thing, with this entity, for the following week if they're kidnapped or gone or lost or abducted. Like, what happens now in their storyline? And you have no idea what really, for the most part, what really happens to their family after, especially in Stranger Things, when you have this kid just go away.
Well, and I think that's actually one of the reasons why people are drawn to serial dramas where there is this kind of constant threat, because I mean, I know, at least speaking for myself, it's one of the reasons I'm drawn to serial dramas where there's a constant threat, is that it's a way to process grief and loss that might be happening constantly. And, you know, to the point that you made earlier, not just grief and loss in the sense of death, but one of the things that comes to mind for me is minority stress. When I am turning on the news and seeing constant things about deaths in my community, about loss of rights in my community, and I work directly in that area. So not only am I personally being threatened, but my work is also constantly being threatened. That feels very much for me like going out and fighting demigorgons and going out and fighting demons and supervillains and whatever genre you're working with. In fact, one of the things that I do for myself when I am feeling like I'm in that kind of stuck point around grief and loss for myself is I'll turn back to those things and see, okay, how can I grieve with these characters? Because it's a step removed from my own grief that allows it to process in a different way. And I do that with clients too. We do this with narrative therapy a lot, where we use narrative. Often in like traditional narrative therapy, you're using somebody's personal narrative, but you can also use things like fan fiction. And, you know, to the point about, can't we just like watch them have a nice day? It's one of the beautiful things about fan fiction. I read so much fan fiction that's like, they're just having a regular day. They're doing laundry. They've got the tag about everything's beautiful, nothing hurts. And there's that opportunity to do that, but to also kind of celebrate those things. And we were talking earlier about collective grief. One of the things that really hit for me was I'm a huge, huge fan of Supernatural. Supernatural did not end well. And it was really hard to collectively grieve the loss of the show because everyone was so mad at it. And I still really, really love it. And most of the people I know who loved it with me won't go back and rewatch it because they feel so burned by the ending. And don't get me wrong, I don't love the ending, but I don't feel burned by the entire 15 seasons of that show. And I love going back to it. And so I think the other thing that comes up for me in thinking about how that connects to grief is how it's such a process of what that looks like to think about and process and develop over time.
But do you think that there's, because I like one of my favorite shows is How I Met Your Mother, and hated that ending. Could not, Ted, get it together. Like I'm wondering if the expectations are our perfect ending, and if showrunners decide something different, then what does the loss look like? Like it ends. It inevitably ends. And so is our grief built up on a system in which like we had hoped for our ending? I have never seen Game of Thrones, sorry. But like I know that was like a big like, oh, everybody hated that ending too. So Lorran.
I think
I'm just so curious about like our own biases of like, this is how it should finish, or this is what so there was a place that I used to work at. It was like, are you complete? Like, so if you give your information, like you talk and you process, and like, are you complete? And I feel like, is this a are you complete moment in which we assume that we will be completed or have some sort of realization or wholeness about like how a story ends based off of our own biases?
I think that's definitely part of it, because I do think that there is a way that we speculate about how a thing is going to end. And when we're disappointed by that ending, it's absolutely that feeling of, now I don't feel complete because the narrative didn't end in the way that I was expecting it to or wanting it to. But I think it's also about how an ending is earned through the writing and the arc of the story. Because the thing that is great about fiction is you do get to decide how something ends. It's not like real life. That's actually what makes it a little bit of escapism, is that it gets to end in those like nice rounded thematic ways. And so I think with shows like How I Met Your Mother and Game of Thrones, Dexter is another one that comes to mind, the ending doesn't feel earned. And that's, I think, why in that like fan exchange with the creator, it feels like we're almost taken advantage of. Like you had an ending and you didn't actually lead us there, versus I think of something like Breaking Bad was a show that had, in my opinion, a perfect ending. And it was a really sad ending. Like nobody got out of that happy. But it felt earned. It felt like it was appropriate. It felt like the closing of a chapter. And I think that's where some of those shows that have the like classic terrible endings, they're not earned. They don't get there thematically.
It makes me think too, because we get a lot, or this was, I think I've read like an article a few years ago where the article was talking about how Netflix was just canceling um, a lot of shows that featured brown and black actors, and they were fantastic shows. They had great ratings, but they just, I don't know, something happened, and I don't want to make any assumptions, but we kind of know. And it makes me think too, back to, I watched The Owl House, a Disney show. It is such a good story, and you have not seen it, you have to. So we have, I believe, either 2 or 3 seasons, and it doesn't, and then it got canceled. And like all the fans were like, no, like they just made it to like the real, like, no, we need to know what happened. And then so I think what the creators managed to do is that they managed to get, I think it was 2 extra episodes, and they had to like, whatever ending they were thinking of doing, that you had to like smush it in there. And then so in the end, we did get like a complete ending, not exactly what the creators were thinking, not really what we wanted, because we just wanted more content, we wanted more episodes, but we got to see the ending. So I was like, okay, that's satisfied. Like it is, like you were saying, Kaela, like it was an ending that was earned, even if it felt like a little bit rushed. And I think that's something, if anyone who works in the movie making industry or whatever is for some reason watching this panel, maybe consider giving us that ending, right? Even if it feels a little bit rushed, it's better than just like cold turkey canceling a show, because we love these characters. We've been with these characters, we've waited. Sometimes they're if we're thinking about, I love watching anime, and that has happened several times where you wait like 5, maybe 10 years in some cases for like the next season or like the next part of the thing. Sometimes we get really lucky, because even if we don't get the anime, we still have the manga we like to refer back to. So that's a good case. But like sometimes having to wait all those years, and then it gets canceled or something, and I'm like, just rush the ending a little bit, but give me an ending. Don't just like cut it short. Yeah.
I always think like it's interesting too, like when we talk about fandom, like when we differentiate between like young fandom and then older, because I'm like, Bluey is a revolution. Like it's a thing. And so I'm so curious, like what will happen when these young shows, like regardless if it's Bluey or Cat Dog or Doug or anything, like evolves or doesn't evolve for these young children, and how that changes their perspective of, I don't know, just like pop culture in general, because like we are seeing a lot of reboots right now. My favorite, one of my favorite shows was Land Before Time. And I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing it now for my kid. And I have a 3-year-old. And so we're now seeing like the revamped Land Before Time. So I'm so curious, like how we as adults like get back into touch with like the things that we saw when we were young. And like we have so many, the Little Mermaid, the Lion King, like all these like live action things that we've just now started doing, which I feel like they're going to be an explosion of. Like I'm so curious how we'll attach that to where we're going, and our kids experience it too, or the young people that we know and love.
I think there's too this expectation too, especially if it's something that has a lot of like lore behind it, or a lot of other like projects that some, like if it's like based on like a series of books or something and it makes it to the screen, or it's like a mini series or something. We have this expectation. If we
Twilight.
love that series, we want it to be like exactly like the books, right? Because we love the books. And if they make some sort of like creative decision, or because the budget didn't, they couldn't quite, or like, the technology wasn't quite as advanced, we're like, oh, we automatically we go like, it sucked, it was horrible, it was bad, why are you even watching this? And I think and I am totally guilty of this, because I think for me, watching something or reading something, it was an escape from all the stress and anxiety of like my real life, right? So I didn't want to read something that made me even more stressed about something, right? I wanted a happy ending. And then I might have a friend, I love her so much, but she will constantly want me to watch things that had a sad ending. And I'm like, why? Why do you want me to suffer through this? And it wasn't until I finally met someone who was like, but that's like an emotion that we have to experience sometimes. And I was like, oh, I was totally running away from feeling sad, because I just felt like that like throughout my life already. So I didn't want to add that like in my hobbies as well. So I was like like completely pushing it away. And then now I think so many things have happened and are happening in our world, whether it's politics, nature, war, like whatever, like even in our small communities, in like in our own families, that we just want either that happy ending, or we want, like, can you just give me like a play by play of my favorite comic or of my favorite book? And that's what I really want. And a lot of people, there's always two different camps. There's like, oh, this is all fan service, like they didn't do anything with the character, or like the opposite of like, oh, there are too many liberties, and now that's not the character I love anymore, right? So it can never make everyone happy, but I feel like maybe now we're moving a little bit towards that of like, I want you to give me exactly what I want, otherwise I'm gonna judge it as a bad project, or like it wasn't worth it, my time. And that makes me a little bit sad, because I'm a huge fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I have not seen the live action, but I have seen a lot of people try not to, but a lot of people have talked about how it was good and bad, right? Especially for long-term fans. And then it just made me remember how when the first movie came out, I went with my siblings and we came out and we were like, that was a horrible movie. Why would you ever? But there was a 5-year-old that was behind us exiting the theater, and he was so excited. And now looking back, and I was like, okay, it wasn't the Avatar for me, but it was for that little kid, right? It made him happy, even though I thought it was like a bad project. But for someone else, it may be fantastic. It might be a great thing. So now I'm like very careful of being like, okay, in my opinion, it wasn't the best, but if somebody else likes it, then that's fantastic. And Yeah, I know. I mean, as a fan, I just want them to do like a play-by-play because that's how I just want to see the same story over and over again. I can never get tired of it. But I also understand that, there's other people that, the art can, cater to, and that's okay.
I mean, I talk a lot, so I apologize. But I just wanted to say the whole purpose of the fandom is allowing characters to have the dignity to fail and to hurt and for things to not go right. Because so often they don't. And I think that these are such important life lessons that especially young people should learn. And I think that when we're tying it back to grief and loss in general, we need to have some reckoning about what's imperfect. We need to have some reckoning about like what's not the way that we wanted life to go. One of the best things they tell us to teach young children is instead of saying don't do this, saying, and then they get hurt, saying I'm sorry that happened to you. Just having compassion and understanding about like someone else's experience. The dignity to fail is a huge thing. And with seeing all these stories, seeing the experiences that people have, regardless if it's for them or for somebody else, or just caring about someone. Like I think about like the, in game, like Iron Man and like this, thinking about these losses that are monumental or enormous or important. Just being mindful that life happens. One of my sister's my favorite quote from my sister is people. And we need these supers to people because they're human. Like they're in some ways. Like, so these are opportunities for us to understand ourselves, understand our experiences, understand who we are and why we love and hate and grieve and worry and all these other things. So that was just my last little spiel.
I think there's two, like this sort of idea of we have good and bad emotions, right? We want to experience the good ones. I want to feel loved and I want to feel happy. I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to grieve. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be upset. I don't want to hurt, right? And I think sometimes we push that away, like I was doing earlier. Like I didn't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel those emotions, but that's part of life. That's we have to. um that's like another way where like the art mirrors life, right? Like it is not everything is going to be perfect. People, like you said, there will be decisions. Not everything is under their control. Let's say the creator really wanted to have this ending, but COVID happened. The actor passed away, and the project had to completely be changed, and it wasn't as great as we wanted it to be or whatever. But like things would happen, and that's okay. And I think a lot of the times that's what it can be quite annoying sometimes in the fandoms where people don't really take that into consideration, and it's just all about, let me just give you a list of complaints about how much I dislike this show and how you should also dislike this show. One of the things that I always enjoyed about watching movies or shows was breaking it down and psychoanalyzing it with my friends, right? And I think it's completely okay for you to be like, that was the worst movie ever. I would never. Did you see this? Did you notice that? Right. But it's completely different than then going to someone else and being like, that movie that you absolutely love, trash. You shouldn't. You shouldn't watch this. And then like it becomes a very toxic fandom, right? That's how we get those sort of like stereotypes of like certain fandoms that are just very like unyielding in the new technology or life or anything changing. And it sucks for not only the creators who work so hard behind the scenes to make this project happen, but also for the fans who really enjoyed it.
That makes me think of the TV show Ted Lasso. Has anyone watched it?
It's on my to watch
Yes!
list.
Okay. I was really resilient against Ted Lasso because I had heard so many good things that I was like, what's the hype? And then, doing my research because, someone says that you have to watch it. They use, a therapist in a good way because there's so many depictions of school counselors, school psychologists, therapists in TV shows that are inaccurate, and it makes people shy away more from therapy. And that was the whole thing in 2016 for me when I started my journey of actually getting certified and, becoming a school psychologist. I was a parent that protested 13 Reasons Why. I hated that show. I hated how they depicted suicide on screen. There was no warnings. I mean, it was, I was up in arms at San Diego Comic-Con, and I'm like, I know you guys didn't produce this, but somebody needs to tell Selena Gomez that this really sucked. Because, I had two middle school kids die by suicide. And then, during the middle school years, when that show came out, and it was just copycats, and it was awful. Like we didn't know how to respond to that. So point being is, looking at it in a more positive light. Yeah, I was just saying about how I loved how Jason Sudeikis really took care of allowing a safe space in their characters of a community that felt safe to express, their grieving, whether it was the loss of a job or relationship. They had in the show a group called Diamond Dogs. So Diamond Dogs were, the characters, people that he trusted, that they can come together and like talk about their feelings, talk about what was going on. And they would end every peer relation session, and that's how I would like to say it, with a howl. Like it was so, then I think about all the hippie stuff that's, out there, and men's groups and things like that. But, we have to recognize, I feel like, as a community, that we have to recognize that it's important to learn what are trusted communities and learn, how we can be vulnerable in order to get that, warm hugs kind of thing. And that's what I really liked about Ted Lasso, the use of a therapist, the use of the main characters, being able to be vulnerable and being very honest with, the pain and suffering they're going through. Like Nate, the assistant coach, is like one of my favorite villains. He really was a villain. He had this huge arc. And I know, Brittany, you got a lot to say about this because we loved him because he came up and then he, hit this apex, and then, he dropped because of the loss of trust amongst his peers. And so where does that come in our ability to build community, make community? And the beauty of this is that they gave us a resolution that said, okay, I messed up, but how can I make it better? And that's what I loved about Ted Lasso. And I am a big fan, and the hype is real. So
it's so real. I was like, I coach for a living, or besides therapy, but I coach, and be a goldfish is a real thing. But the thing kind of to tie back.
Wait. Now you got to explain the goldfish for
okay.
People.
So goldfish have
Yes.
the smallest, like what recognition of
smallest memory.
Yeah.
So okay, we're talking about short-term, long-term working memory, right? As a psychologist, right? So goldfish supposedly have really bad short-term, long-term memory. So Ted Lasso, the coach, is like, okay, you had a loss, be a goldfish, forget about it, let's move on. So that's where, be a goldfish comes in. But anyways.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What I will say, kind of going back to you, Elizabeth, in thinking about Ted Lasso specifically, is here is a story in which there were no undercutting, meanness. Like, it was a comedy that had nothing to do with like hurting other people. Because even like Parks and Rec or The Office or something else, like make fun of other people, whereas Ted Lasso like truly is a nice comedy. And so many people, when it got not canceled or when it ended, were saying like, this is why it failed. And it's frustrating because it's like, well, how do we decide what is good humor? How do we decide what is good television? Because Ted Lasso had a great following, and like for them to say, or for people or spectators to say, oh, it's because they're too nice, seems ridiculous to me. But that goes back to like this fandom shame of, oh, like we know what we want, we know how we think something is funny, we get to decide. And producers, like, they had a successful run, they had a strong female lead, they had lots of things going on for them, and then there's all this like negativity about it, which was like shocking to me, because while we're talking about grief and loss, like here's a show that I really love, that I like wanted to tune into, that I wanted to watch, that I wanted to laugh with. The number one thing that I watch is like when Keeley got broken up with, like in that locker room scene. It's the best comedic like comedy like it's show ever. It's so good, so well written. And it's sad it's over. But I think that this is why you have this episode is like really talking about like how we miss these shows, how we miss these characters.
Now, which episode of Keeley getting broken up with? Because she's, that was the beauty of Keeley, was her character was this model and she was cute, and you expect her to be this blonde bimbo, but she was smart and she was caring. And
when Roy got exposed in the locker room.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have like the coach be like, what? Like, it's so good. It's so good.
And so those breakups are real. And what I loved about the characters was that you had this blonde, pretty girl, and you expect to hate her. I wanted to hate her, just wanted to hate her. But I loved her. She was like one of my favorite characters because she was smart, she was intelligent, she had good female friendships, and she was being honest with, the people that she was dating. And yeah, like that breakup was hard. I mean, like I'm like, I want them to ship, but it didn't happen. But I was able to grieve that. And the writers did a great job in that arc and let me allow to follow her grief, which was beautiful. I mean, it was so well written. I got that closure. I mean, even though the characters didn't have closure themselves, they did get closure in some ways that, most human beings are like, hey, it didn't work out. I mean, like, that was like, okay, I get that.
Earlier, I had another panel, completely different topic, that I was recording, and somebody said, what was it that they said? I think it was with the Korean dramas, and I'm not sure if they said like anime as well, but they said that they had consultants, like mental health consultants, and that's why those stories like have such a big impact on us sometimes, because they consulted someone like what is the most possible, like, or asking like how can I get people to feel the most about this situation or this character. And I think one of the things I love / kind of hate about just the mental health field is that it's so broad, right? We can never be an expert at everything because there's so many different areas, which is fantastic also, because please come on in and somebody like fill in all the empty areas that we have. But being a part of like conversations with or being at the table with the producers or the creators of shows or books or whatever, it's fantastic, because as we were having all conversation, sharing all of our experiences and everything, I kept thinking about how sometimes we are in a space in our life when we're not doing great, We are feeling horrible on the inside, and then we watch our favorite show and we thought it was trash. And then I just feel trash. And then I'm just gonna, every horrible thing that I feel inside, I'm just gonna blurt it out because the internet is, I can do it anonymously, right? And I think sometimes one of the reasons why I love using, geek culture in therapy, in the therapy session, is because it gives us that, um, that I don't know, like that material of us sort of understanding what's going on with our own life. So if we find ourselves in a situation where I am so against this one show and I like intensely like dislike it, or I am grieving so much and it's really hurting, my personal relationships or whatever. Maybe there's something else. There's something behind. Maybe seeking professional help will be very a valuable thing for us to do. But we don't tend to think about it in that way. And I will highly like encourage people to seek help, talk to someone, because when we are you know experiencing those situations in our life, sadly sometimes that's what we feel like, where we feel comfortable, like in that chaos, in that like toxic relationships. So we want those portrayed on screen, right? Or we idolize those if it gets portrayed on screen, and it's not necessarily the healthiest way to go about it. And like I just wanted to go back to a point that somebody made earlier about how it gives us media gives us that opportunity to feel our emotions in a way that is a bit distant from ourselves, right? So if you are in need of a good cry, there's movies we can watch and give us a cry. And it's not me crying about something, it's something else, until I'm ready to talk about that thing that made me cry or made me laugh, right? And I think one of the great things about being able to have easy access, I guess, nowadays, with all the different streaming platforms that are available to us, is that we can pick and choose, right? So if I was fighting with my brother and I was like, dude, we have a podcast on Avatar: The Last Airbender. You need to watch the live action. And he's like, no, I'm biased. I already hate it. I don't want to suffer through it. And I don't want to be like mean to people because the whole time I'm just going to hate it. And I'm like, valid point. So if you're not gonna like a story, don't watch it. That's within our power to be able to do that. And if you feel like watching something else or something that has a happy ending, that's okay. And then when you're ready to experience those, what are usually termed as negative emotions or bad emotions, then the product will be there in some sort of streaming platform.
I
Well,
think
and I
too,
think there's
just
also, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, some of these like quote unquote negative emotions can bring you guys together. Like I remember sitting. So my spouse is from Mexico. I remember sitting in the room of the theater watching Coco and just having everyone just sob. Just sob. And these experiences, like when you're willing to touch them, even with like Moana or something else, like they can bring you together. They can bring community together and people that don't look like you. And so it's not necessarily running from, it's running to, like these really necessary times in which we connect. Like, so Disney and Pixar have been crushing it and breaking our hearts. But really thinking about like the big picture of it, of like why are they doing this, why are they making these, why does this exist? And it's to bring community and to build with each other, because it's so important that we have each other, especially in times of hardship. Like Coco demolished me. Inside Out demolished me. And like these are really wonderful stories to have conversations with clients about, to have conversations with our children about, for those of you who are parents, to really kind of like play off of like, what does it mean to feel? What does it mean to feel sad? Because sadness is okay. Hurt is okay. Grief is okay. But do we invite these conversations and just assume that there's just resilience? We're allowed to sit in the experience of hurt. That's okay. That's the biggest thing for me. My grief lady lens of just being like, be sad. It's okay to be sad.
Well, and it gives us a shared language to talk with one another about and relate to one another when we can't relate on other levels. So I'm thinking, for example, of a client I worked with who's having a really hard time expressing anger about a breakup. And what we came to in expressing anger about the breakup was if she couldn't feel anger towards her ex, maybe she could feel anger towards Taylor Swift's exes. And we started using Taylor Swift music as a way to process things. And so I think also to the point of something like Coco being very rooted in grief and death, there's also this opportunity to look at other aspects of grief and loss that aren't just the painful emotions. One of the things that I love about Coco and love about the whole idea of something like Dia de los Muertos is that it is as much about celebration of life as it is about grief.
Mhm. So I completely left the meeting. And when I came back, it said that it was your recording. So I am hoping we cut all of that, even if I didn't hear it. So yes, fingers crossed that that would happen. I just kind of came into the last bit of it, and I think there is this um I don't know if it's just like maybe in my own experiences where like grief again is being seen as like a negative thing, and having that loss is especially of like a loved one is seen as um something like really really bad, right? And then so we have like in different cultures, like you were saying, like in the Mexican culture where we celebrate that as well. We're like, yes, that person is gone, but also let's celebrate their life, right? And then so there is this way we can reframe or thinking about grief. What are we learning from it? What are we getting from this? Like, is there a way that we can honor that person even though they're no longer with us? Or I can honor, you know, my job or whatever it is that I believed in, because like we mentioned earlier, there's different forms of grief. So there are so many different ways in which can sort of address it, but most of the time we're just like, well, I'm not going to cry, or I'm just going to push it away because it's a very sort of like uncomfortable feeling. And if you are watching this panel and you're experiencing grief in some way or another and you don't really know what to do, that's all we're here for, you know. And even if you only see us for like, you know, like a few sessions or whatever, if that's helpful for you, that's fantastic. If you need to talk to someone, that's what's wonderful about you know, having a community or being a part of a fandom, right? You would eventually find those like little pockets within the fandom where like so supportive, and like I can find other people who are also grieving, you know, the Loki die, and I can talk to them and we can cry together, and then we'll feel better and we'll move on, and you know, life will continue. But and so we also need that in our real life, right? We also need to have that supportive community as someone we can reach out to when we are going through a tough situation, not only like grieving something that has to be that has to do with the fandom, but also in our own sort of personal life. And so I don't want to keep you for much longer. I think this is an amazing conversation that we had, and I'm so glad you all agreed to be a part of it today. And I just wanted to see if anybody had any last thoughts or any last things that they wanted um, to give before we end the panel for today.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, for any individual who is experiencing grief and loss, specifically bereavement, like what is normal complex grief is anywhere between 1 and 3 years, and complicated grief is anywhere between 3 and 5. Like you experiencing traumas, tribulations, and just having a hard time or a hard go of it can be endless. Like I usually tell my clients, like grief can be a bee or a bear. it's something that's small that's nagging at you, or it's something that's very dangerous. It can be really a lot. So to have some self-compassion. And I'm gonna quiz the panelists. How many types of grief do you guys think exists in the world? What's a number?
Wait, is it infinite? X.
So research shows 16 different
Mm.
types. And so for those individuals who feel like for grief researchers, like our whole like the 5 stages of grief, boo 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 boo, we're not doing that. There's lots of different types of grief. If you are experiencing grief specifically around loss, you really need to reach out to someone who knows what their stuff is. There's a huge importance to know how to take care of your loss. Please seek somebody who can assist you. I'm very precious. It's very precious about this like specific topic to me. And so find somebody who can specifically help you, who is trained, who knows how to make sure that you're going to be okay if you've experienced something that's like traumatic or hard.
Yeah, and if you're interested, because originally that's what I wanted to do with this panel. I wanted to address the 16 different types of grief with like different characters. Maybe we can see it do it at a later time. But if you really want to know now, a quick Google search and we'll give you the list of the 16 griefs. But yes, please reach out if you are in need of some additional support for whatever reason. Okay, so let's say someone is at that stage in their life where they are ready to run towards those uncomfortable feelings. So start practicing that. Is there a show or a movie that you will recommend for people to watch to learn more about that has like a good representation of grief and managing grief?
I mean, I'm going to go back to Ted Lasso. Like they even knew at the end of the show when their season was ending of how to take care of their fandoms as well. I mean, like right down to like, okay, spoiler, right down to the very, very last episode. So Jason Sudeikis, I think I apologize if I'm butchering the name, but he is the nephew of the actor that played Norm on Cheers. So the TV show Cheers, at the end of the show, they put up a Native American photograph, at the end of the bar. They did it the same thing in Ted Lasso. So it was in a way not honoring the people before him, but it was also honoring his uncle, honoring, Native Americans. I mean, it was very impactful in that way because not all real human grief is like nice and tidied up in a little bow, but it gave us some sort of catharsis when we saw that. We knew they like build it up. They allowed us to, prepare for the ending of that show. And I love it because it made me think about how different cultures have different forms of grief. And I'm not here to poo-poo like what anyone else does in order to have that mourning or anything like that. For example, there's a Tibetan grief where ritual where they allow, instead of burying the body, they allow the body to be exposed to the elements and to have it go back to the elements, whether it's vultures or worms or whatever. And so that is one way they grieve. And to us in Western culture, we're like, that's horrible. That's, how could you do that? That's, disrespectful of the body. But, as we move out into the world and help people, what are some of your rituals that are supportive of your grieving? What are some positive rituals in that sense?
So a show that came up for me, the first things that came up for me, I was like, "Ooh, those characters aren't dealing with grief well." But a show where I think grief actually is dealt with well is Adventure Time, specifically the episode where Finn is building the tower into space and learns that that's not actually a healthy coping mechanism to try and just push all the feelings away. And then to follow that up, everything about Fiona and Cake did a fantastic job of rounding that out and what that looks like in adulthood as opposed to childhood.
I think Fleabag is probably my top of all time. If you have not seen Fleabag, could not recommend it more. It took the legs out from under me when I was watching it. Did not expect it to be about just so much survivor's guilt and traumatic grief, and the idea that she should be grieving in this one way, in this one relationship, that she's actually pretty content about having grieved in a healthy way, and the way in which everyone keeps reframing her grief to the loss of a parent. And really it's about the loss of her best friend, and the way in which that is so disenfranchised, in part because people do not understand what the context of that loss actually meant for her. It's brilliant, it's funny, it's maybe not one that you watch with the family, or maybe you do watch with the family, because my parents loved it. So fun for all ages.
Yeah, I was gonna say for me, for adults, The Last of Us or The Walking Dead, I think are pretty resonant. And for young people, I'm gonna age myself. Rugrats. Just thinking about transitions, and how life becomes different as you get older, and the complications of being a human is really showcased.
I always ask questions because I kind of want to know what other people think, but I don't have an answer prepared. So thank you so much for going first and giving me time to think. But I was thinking, I know there's so like I've been watching a lot of anime. I know there's a lot, but the one that is like sort of like more dear to me is Fruit Basket. I think they do a fantastic job at showing like different types of grief, like different reasons why somebody might grieve, and they might engage in different behaviors and stuff. And then I think they did a very good job, like at the end, of wrapping everyone's sort of story without leaving anyone sort of like out to dry. And yeah, I think it's fantastic because even the main character, she is helping everyone else, and then at the end, she realizes that she also has to help herself. For the grief or like losing her mother. Yeah, so I would recommend that one. All right, so we are at the end, sadly. But if anybody wanted to reach out to you to ask questions or do a consultation or seek any type of services or anything like that, where can they reach you? Or if you have any projects you're working on that you want other people to know, let us know. Now's the time.
So I'm not taking clinical consultation right now, but for folks who are interested in fandom research, you can find me on Twitter at AKNerdFighting or Facebook, Always Keep Nerd Fighting. That's my partnership with my writing partner, Dr. Tanya Cook. And we wrote a book called Fandom Acts of Kindness, a guide to activism, advocacy, and doing chaotic good. We're also promoting a book about the boys, where we have a chapter that book is called Soups Ain't Always Heroes.
I have right here. The other one's over there. So yes, highly recommend those. They're actually great. I love them.
I will be with these lovely people at WonderCon, and we're going to talk about Gen V. So if you're a fan, as you should be.
Even if you're not, you should still come.
You should still come. And then you can find me on Instagram as B Therapeutic, like Bumble.
I don't have any cool projects unless you want to read encyclopedias. But you can find me on ResearchGate, Rubi Mc Coy, and absolutely feel free to reach out if you have any questions about any publications surrounding traumatic bereavement, grief, and trauma, particularly within sexual and gender diversity populations.
And for myself, I'm a little busy. So this is for 2024 and I don't have all the dates in front of me and I need to update my website. So my website is littlebrainstorm.com. And so first, you'll find me if you just Google my name on Amazon. I have 3 picture books on social emotional learning for kids. My characters are named Brain Boy and Bob. Bob has ADHD and is chasing his brain around, trying to make good decisions. So one's called The First Day of School Jitters. The one is another one is Ghost in the Maze. It's about friendship and how to make friendship. And there's lots of mazes in that one. And the third one is called Brain Boy and Bob and the Very Hungry Maggot. And it talks about, Brain Boy's origin. So I am appearing in 3 different conventions for speaking about that intersectionality of BIPOC, neurodivergency, and that experience of being that and queerness and all that fun stuff. So the first one is WonderCon. So I think I'm on 5 different panels for WonderCon. I'll post it. And then there's CAS, the California Association of School Psychologists. That is in April of April 11th and 12th. And then there's the Therapeutic Applied Geek and Gaming Summit. That's tags.com, I believe it is. And that is also like the end of April 20th or so. So if you're interested, there's a whole bunch of us, talking about geekiness and mental health. We'd love to see you at the tags. And so that you can learn more, even if you're not a therapist. We are very inclusive and trying to get people to learn more about themselves. So yay, thanks for coming.
Yes, and all that information will be in the description, so you can have easy access to that. And if you have any comments to any of the things that we said, if you would like us to discuss anything, if you'd like to hear more from any of our panelists today, please let us know in the comments, and we will try to make that happen. I will definitely be collaborating with everyone here once again, and yes, I look forward to seeing you guys in future videos. And thank you so much for making it to the end of this video and for putting up with all the technical difficulties on my side. Thank you so much. And yeah, don't forget to reframe and re-enchant your life. Bye.